You said they're the science. I'm really curious on this because I know you guys invest. I wasn't familiar with the numbers, so I'm super impressed to know those are the numbers that you're putting into it. Some of the data and science that you're coming across, what are some of the updated science that you're seeing? And let's maybe break it down, whether it's linked to neuroscience or to some of the tools. Like what sort of, because the evidence or the validation to do with, let's say, DISC, for example, which over the years I know people kind of question. Share some insights about some of the science and data related to
Sure.
that.
So look, traditionally speaking, the way tools like this are validated is it's sort of amassing evidence. It's a lot like a case in a court of law. You know, you put together as much evidence as you can that suggests this thing does what it says it does.
Yeah.
And then the second part to that, so you've got validity, it does what it says it does. Then you've got reliability, it does it consistently.
Yeah.
So two sort of traditional components. And over the years, you know, people evolve how this is measured and that kind of thing. And a really standard way to look at a tool and its degree of consistency, for example, reliability, is something called Cronbach's alpha, which is a consistency measure. Ultimately, you know, we don't need to go into the deep math of that, but it's ultimately a consistency measure. 1, it does it every time perfectly. 0, it does it never, ever. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in that bandwidth is where your reliability sits, somewhere between 0 and 1. And, you know, we're consistently trying to keep that at a high level. So a couple of things that we've done over the years to do that. One, editing the questionnaire, taking a different approach to the questionnaire, collecting more data from people without extending the questionnaire. Because again, in psychometrics, one of the things we've got to be really careful about is we could get really thorough. We could ask 500 questions of someone to determine one characteristic, but no one's going to do it. Yeah. So we've got to find that happy medium. And that's where the mathematicians become so valuable in this, because they can start to say, well, that question has more potency than that question at measuring this characteristic. And they can show it all in math. So that's something that you know, I'm a bit of a math nerd. I like that stuff. So for me, one of my favorite things to do is sit in the office with Eric and just have him talk and try to understand what he's saying. So he's shown me some of the stuff that he's done around, you know, using different models and things and exploring models that aren't traditionally used in psychometrics too. So exploring things outside of that. So there's a whole concept around building tests that is used. So testing theory. And when we say tests, I mean like tests that you would give college students or you know, people going into certain fields, and how do we discriminate between the people who are really good at that and the people that aren't good at that? Those kinds of things. So that's one of the advancements that I've watched TTI make is really getting deep into the mathematics of it all and starting to explore different ways to compute things. Mm-hmm. Second one is our head of R&D, being a neuroscientist, we do a lot with measuring brainwaves. So he has actually just been awarded in the last couple of years a patent on a validation process for validating the statements that go inside an ipsative assessment, a self-reporting assessment like DISC, using the response in the brain to a word. So we can actually, we've got a little brain lab in our office that you can go in, you put the EEG cap on. We can flash words on a TV to you, and you don't have to say anything or do anything. Your brain does all the work. And we measure the reaction to that word, and we can graph a person's graph using just those results. So it's pretty scary when you start to get into, my brain is telling people what it is. Excuse me. So that's been a really interesting one for us in terms of not just it's cool, you get to see a 3D model of the brain, kind of where it's lighting up and all that kind of stuff. But what was really cool about it is it made us see stuff that we hadn't seen before. So I'll give you an example. There was an item in one of our assessments that it talked about math and science. Mm-hmm. And people who selected that were the way we were looking at the group, the cluster of grouping, or the cluster of statements in that grouping. That told us that they had an attraction toward theoretical knowledge and understanding and that kind of thing. But we had a person who had a severe negative reaction in their brain to math and science. And yet this person came out on our assessment as very high on that characteristic. Now, what was really interesting about this is when we debriefed this with this person, he says, well, we sort of said, why such a negative reaction to math and science? He said, well, I'm a literary professor. I don't care about numbers. And that's not important. What's important is understanding of literature and its place in history and the story it tells. And, you know, so for him, he thirsts for knowledge. He loved knowledge, but not that kind of knowledge. So that actually drove us to changing that item in the assessment. So it opens our eyes to things that we may not have seen before.
Yeah.
The third thing that I'll toss in there is we actually have a testing procedure going on at the moment where, as people go through their assessment, we give them all the normal questions. What we're actually doing is we're giving them 5, 6 things at the end of each questionnaire that don't count toward their questionnaire. And what we're doing is we're validating new statements, new words that we're going to put in reports or in questionnaires.
Got it.
So as things change, you know, you think about the life-changing event that it's a world-shifting event, what we're going through right now.
Completely.
That is going to affect the type of words that people respond to.
Yeah.
So, you know, mentioning, for instance, like some countries might really, if you put something in there about politicians or politics, some countries might be in absolute awe of their politicians. You know, I think of, for us down here, Jacinta Ardern, the way she's handled this situation. Wow. But then we can look around the world and sort of look at some of these other ways that things have been handled in different countries and think, gee, I really can see how that could have been done better. And I'm not saying I could have done it better, but it's one of those things that I think hindsight is a really, it's easy. It's 2020. You know, you can always look backwards and fix it. But to be in the moment and, you know, those people who have responded so well to these situations, you can imagine how that's going to influence how people respond to a statement about politicians in certain countries.
Yes. Yeah. So it's brilliant. You're literally gathering that data now to then make the tools even more validating, really, for future.
Yeah, because what we've seen over time, Mark, is when we do something called item analysis is something that we go through, and then factor analysis is another part of that, where we actually go through the process of looking at every single statement and where it gets ranked and by who.
Yes.
In terms of when we say by who, we don't identify Mark, but we identify people who are in this cluster of behaviors. Yes. They tend to put this statement here.
Yeah.
And when we do that, what that ultimately does is it helps us to see that certain items go bad. And I'll give you an example. There was a back in 2011 when we had a statement in one of our report or one of our questionnaires. It's a highly validated questionnaire over many, many years, very well respected science behind it, and it had flying a plane into a building.
Yeah.
That was something, and then you have September 11 happen.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have that statement in a report anymore. It's 100% not okay to have that in it.
Yeah, and you've got to pick up and change those. And I know, like, you're talking there about adapting, and you mentioned driving forces, right? So that was the work of Spranger, the internal motivators, which is a classic example, was based on his original papers as 6. Now it's got these polarities of each of those 6 into 12 driving forces. That's a great example, because it could be that something that almost repels me is enough to drive me. It's my driving force, right? So it's not as cut and dry as, well, I'm only driven by this thing. The lack of it, the absence of it, or it not being done in a way I want can also be my driving force.
Right? And I think that's another thing that helps to separate assessment providers again, Mark, is, you know, you talked about facilitation as being a key, and it is.
Yeah.
But one of our jobs is to try to make facilitation easy as well. Like we don't want to give people these reports and have them misinterpret them.
Yes.
But at the same time, we want to make them as easy to read as we can.
Yeah.
And driving forces is a great example of that. You know, there's one of the spectrums that talks about structure and order. You know, now, given what I said earlier about me being very structured and ordered and that kind of thing, you would expect me to come up high on that thing. I don't.
Yes.
I actually repel structure. I'm right down the other end of that.
Yes.
But I'm always looking for new ways to structure things.
Yes.
And I'm seeking new structure. Now, if it's me following structure, I'm always kind of revolting against it. I'm learning this is also ingrained in my 5-year-old right now. So we're really, it's an interesting time in our house right now as I discover my son. And, you know, when we then start to look at, in business, I've always been someone who's really big on structure and creating structure and having other people live by it, but then I don't follow it myself. So it's this incongruence in my behavior and what I expect from other people. And as my dad always used to say to me, do as I say, not as I do.
This is why behavior and the tools are so fascinating now.